Good morning or afternoon, actually. This is Jeff Nosanov, your host of the Space Madness podcast, with my longtime assistant Wednesday. And it's our first episode of 2026. So that's exciting. And excited to start the year with a very interesting person, Brent Sherwood, space architect extraordinaire, retired, but still quite active in the space. So I had the privilege of working with him at JPL, and I am wearing my JPL polo shirt, which you can't tell because of the cat, but I thought I would bring that out. And I only worked with him for a few years, but I learned a lot from him, and that experience shaped a lot of what I went on to do. So with that, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself, Brent, and we can get talking.
Sure. Well, so as Jeff said, I'm Brent Sherwood. I self-describe as a space architect, although I've had multiple careers doing different things, all in civil space, civil and commercial space. And I've been retired for a little over a year.
How's that going?
Well, I finally have time to work on writing that I want to do instead of writing that somebody else needed me to do.
Sure.
So that part's great. We also just emigrated to Spain, so we live in Barcelona now. So,
Wonderful.
retired in Barcelona and writing. Not bad.
Cool. Yeah. So let's just get started with what is a space architect? That's not an obvious, not a self-explanatory title, I think.
Yeah, so it's funny when you talk to architects, they're like, "Yeah, we're always about space because that's what architects do is design spaces." But no, this literally means architecture in space. So it's a new professional field that is embodied by people around the world who come from backgrounds of either aerospace engineering or terrestrial architecture or both, who are trying to identify principles and practices and standards for how to design the human environment for use in space. I guess I'd say at the outset, so we find that particularly among young professionals and students, it has its own kind of allure. We get requests all the time from particularly students around the world who say, "Oh, I discovered this thing called space architecture and that's what I want to do. And how do I get started?" And all that. As you might imagine, the number of practicing space architects is very small so far. So there's a caution that comes with any advice we give young professionals. But we classify it as a new field because the combination of the very complicated things you have to do to design for human environments, which architects are trained to do, and you know what the practice of architecture is all about and why architects are licensed on Earth and so forth. Combining that with all of the technical challenges for aerospace engineering, for building things that work in a permanently lethal environment at high speeds and high energies and alien environments with dust and gravity, different gravity and so forth. Combining those two things is super complicated. And so we see it as a field unto itself. And as more normal people fly in space, that is people who have not devoted their lives to, high-speed flight and safety practices and space engineering and all this, but normal people who pay to go instead of who are paid to go, the importance of doing genuine architectural design for those environments will increase. So that's kind of what we see over the coming decades.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. When I met you, it was in the context of mission architecture for planetary missions. And it was through that lens that I discovered at JPL what I really enjoyed is thinking at that level of the missions themselves and not at the system level or subsystem level, although that's also interesting. But as I understand, that planetary mission architecture was just part of your career. So I'd love to go all the way back, start with what led you to architecture in the first place. I mean, was space part of your vision? How all that came about in your life?
Sure. Well, so to go all the way back so I was born the same year that NASA was, which is 1958. And so I grew up kind of weaned on the Apollo program and Star Trek and 2001: A Space Odyssey. And so in those days of the 60s, it was evident to me and my friends that humanity was going to do amazing things in space. And I would say sort of instinctively, subconsciously, in some way I can't really tease apart, I was just attracted to that. And so basically, by the time I was 10, all I ever wanted to do was build cities on the moon.
Cool.
However, in the early 70s, or by the mid 70s, when I graduated from high school, Apollo was done, Skylab was done, Apollo-Soyuz was done. The U.S. was not flying in space at all. And so to a junior in high school, it seemed, even to a junior in high school, it seemed at the time that that's maybe not a great thing to devote myself to.
I see.
If it's not really a thing.
Sure.
And I was too young, I'd say too naive to know that the space industry goes in waves. And that was a downtime. So I pivoted to my second favorite thing at the time, which was architecture.
Okay.
So I went to college in 1976 intending to become an architect. And I majored in architecture. I double majored in art history, actually. And then in 1980, stayed at Yale and went to the architecture school for 3 years to get a master's in architecture. In the spring of 1981, so partway through that program, is when the shuttle started flying. And seeing that amazing machine, which, as you know, in its first launch was glistening white, right? The tank wasn't orange yet.
Right. It was
all
painted.
It was all painted. It was all
and
painted.
All that 600,000 pounds of paint or whatever it was.
Yeah. So seeing that amazing machine succeed, I was like, I could have had a V8. So I decided that it was not too late. That by the time, literally the way I thought about it was, by the time I'm ready to retire someday, there will be people doing exactly what I always wanted to do. And it will be unacceptable if I'm not one of them. So already still getting my master's in architecture, determined to get another degree in aerospace engineering so that I could put the two together. So that's what I did. After Yale, I went to the University of Maryland, funded as a NASA graduate research fellow, and got my master's in aerospace engineering. And then my career started.
Okay. So great timing that we're doing this podcast now when you can see that you achieved your goal of as a retiree and as a retired space architect. But I just want to point something out to the audience that I think is underappreciated by the general public, which is that, if I have this right, there's 5 years of consecutive exams that architects have to take. Is that right? I know someone who did that.
Well,
that is mind-boggling.
Yeah, to become a licensed architect, it varies from state to state, right? Because the licensure goes by state, but they're fundamentally all the same. You work in practice, and you prepare for the licensure exam.
Okay.
And it's a combination of, it's basically just like becoming a medical doctor. There's stuff you got to know, and there's a practical component from having worked in the field under a licensed architect. So I didn't do those things. I immediately, when I got my degree, I immediately went into my aerospace program.
I see. Okay.
Which still, 3 years of graduate school in architecture and then 4 years of graduate school in aerospace.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get my first job until I was 30.
Okay.
So, which is kind of insane. Really, it even was back then, but it was kind of a measure of determination, let's say.
Sure. And excuse me, I really like that, because one of the things I want to share in this podcast is that I want everyone on Earth to see themselves in space, either literally, as in working in the space field, or see that the space field has an impact on your life, everyone. And so hearing stories like what you just described of endless education is really motivating. And that's part of the takeaways I want this audience to see, is that you can find your way in. I'm a story about myself, and there's room for everyone. So thank you for all of that.
Definitely room for something I commonly say to audiences and young professionals is, although space is very engineering intensive, not every space professional is an engineer by a long shot.
Right. Yeah.
There are accountants and managers and administrative experts, and it literally takes a whole universe of skills, professional skills. And so for people who want to be involved, and I agree with you, people should want to be involved, because space is fundamental, not just to modern life, but especially to our future life. There's lots of ways. And, not everybody needs to be an engineer.
Sure.
Even within the space architecture community, there is a diversity of opinion about what it ought to take to be a space architect, since there are no licensure requirements, in the field yet. We're in early days. And so people like me can just say, hey, I'm a space architect. I got a degree here and a degree there. And so somebody tell me I'm not.
Sure.
But in the future, that will be different. And so we have discussions about what it takes. My personal view is there's a chart I normally use when I lecture to students. There's a huge list of subsystem specialties that are required for every space system.
Okay.
And, attitude control and guidance and nav,
power,
and propulsion,
thermal,
and structures and power, thermal. Yeah, all those things. If your spaceflight system is going to carry people, there's an additional big list of stuff. There's life support and radiation shielding and, food systems and blah, 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 blah. On the other hand, if you have nothing to do with space, but you do terrestrial architecture, there's an equally long list of specialties. And kind of the point of space architecture is that space systems that fly today are designed by engineers. All that big list of stuff that architects are trained to do are not things that engineers are trained to do.
Right.
And it's okay if you have a highly trained mission crew, former military pilots who are used to privation, we could call it, right? Or even in early days of tourism, where you pay an obscene amount of money for a short ride in a spaceflight system, it's okay to not have hotel-like accommodations or environments that are really designed around human behaviors and so forth. But that won't be okay in the future. And so I believe very strongly that the list of things which architects are trained in, plus the list of things that aerospace engineers are trained in, together represent the Venn diagram of skills required to be good at this new field. It's a complicated field.
Yeah. Very interesting. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the history of ocean-going vessels and the 5,000 years it took to build a cruise ship. And I wonder if there's any analogs there between building a thing that floats and moves to building a thing that floats and moves that people want to go on.
Yeah. Not least of which is, for your viewers who are experienced cruises, there is a very definite, in the hospitality industry, it's called front of house, back of house. There's a very definite division between front of house facilities and functions and back of house facilities and functions. So on a cruise ship, you never see the kitchen. And in fact, it's only rarely that you see all the hallways and elevators that connect all that stuff behind the scenes, right? You don't see that stuff. And there's a reason for that, because the amount of activity that goes on in order to make a resort experience for the paying passengers optimal it's huge.
Yeah.
For like 2,000 passengers, there are probably 800 staff, crew and staff on that ship.
It's like when you open the wrong door in a restaurant where you're looking for the bathroom and you realize, oh, right, the decor is out here.
Right.
Yeah. And the rest of it is the workplace. Yeah.
But the architects do both, right? You have to design all that stuff in the back and you have to design all that stuff in the front. And the relationship between the two is what makes the total architecture work. Anyway, so to get back to your question, actually, so when I was close to getting my aerospace degree, I started looking for a place to work. And long story short, I was extremely lucky to cross paths with somebody who had been a hero of mine since I was a little kid. It was Gordon Woodcock, a technical manager at Boeing.
Okay.
Who was just at the beginning of forming another new Space Futures team, because Boeing had just won the Phase CD contract for Space Station. And so Gordy was looking for what Boeing called a configurator, which is basically a word for an architect.
Okay.
And at the same time, I was looking for a job. And so my first job literally was doing space architecture.
Wow.
And so I thought it was perfect. I was at Boeing. And then President Bush made the SEI speech. I'm like, oh my God, I'm at the right place at the right time. And we supported NASA's 90-day study and all these, we were on contract to do engineered concepts for human, lunar, and Mars exploration. It was amazing. The 90-day study is its own little blip in history, and it led to the demise of the SEI because of its price tag.
Can you go into that a little bit more? I'm not actually familiar.
So there are kind of multiple generations of trying to plan human planetary exploration. And at the time, in the late 80s, is what we call the OTV phase. So there were a variety of ideas that the aerospace primes had for orbital transfer vehicles, different types, different sizes, different technologies. And NASA started planning the post-space station. Remember, space station was just now approved the first time, back when it was called Space Station Freedom, and it was now in phase CD. So the engineering was starting to get serious. And so NASA started to look to what comes after space station. And so it was rejuvenating some long-range planning for human planetary exploration. That the technology basis was this generation of orbital transfer vehicle technologies, cryogenic propulsion, aerobraking, aero capture, none of which had been done, but this was sort of the milieu that planning was being done in. And so NASA Marshall in particular let a series of contracts to aerospace primes. At Boeing, we won the major one. Gordy's team won the major one, which was called Space Transfer Concepts and Analysis for Exploration Missions. And we were hired to engineer concepts for different propulsion technologies and how to get humans to Mars and so forth. That became the basis of what NASA put forward in response to President Bush's call for SEI. When the announcement happened, NASA kind of circled the wagons and said, okay, in fact, there was language from Congress that said within 90 days, the administration has to, so it was called the 90-day study.
Got it. Okay.
And we supported that. Others supported that. It was run by NASA. And it was done in what I would call old school planning, Von Braun era kind of planning, which was we just take all the technology, we add it up, we make the math close. Then we turn the crank and find out what this is going to cost. And then we rack it all up. So in doing so, it killed itself because the racked up price tag was something that everybody choked on.
Sure.
And so SEI contained the seed of its own demise for that reason. But anyway, it was all moot because in 1992, Bill Clinton won the election, and I walked into our director's office the next morning and said, we're not going to be going to Mars anytime soon. So you got to get me across the street, the space station program, so I can learn how to actually build things. So I moved to the space station program. I started over, really. I was 4 years into my Boeing career, but I started over as a bottom rung manufacturing engineer.
Okay.
Because I wanted to learn how to build these things. And I discovered that we actually did not know how to build the modules for a space station. So within a couple of years, my team had figured out a lot of things about how to build the ship in the bottle. And so I learned a lot there. And again, that was phase C of the program. And then Boeing moved me on to other things, some commercial space programs. I got moved to Seattle. I was on Sea Launch for a while. They bought McDonnell Douglas and Rockwell and Hughes. And so the company changed around. And so I moved to Southern California.
Okay.
And worked on advanced space transportation stuff for a while, new business, some attempts at commercial human space flight business. Then I got moved to Houston, and I was business development director for Space Station for a few years.
Okay.
And then by this time, the cycle had gone down and come back up. In the mid-90s, by the way, during a down cycle, at NASA, the Space Futures teams were not allowed to put the word Mars on any of their charts.
Wow.
So contrast that with what we've seen in the last 15 years, where it's all about Mars and it's only about Mars. So this is maybe the lesson here is just for anybody who's really interested in space futures or civil space futures, there are ups and downs. It goes in cycles. And persistence is either a virtue or a flaw. I'm not sure which. But in my case, in 2004, I was made director of space exploration at Boeing.
That's a pretty cool title.
It would seem so. However, by then I knew how long it takes for real programs to happen because of space station, sea launch, these other programs I'd been on. And there are good reasons and bad reasons why they take so long and cost so much. But I had learned a lot, clearly. And then Mike Griffin was the NASA administrator. Admiral Steidl was brought in to run the Constellation program. And it was obvious to me that that program was doomed to fail. And I thought it would die of its own weight, which is what happened. There was not nearly enough money to run it the way Steidl wanted to run it. Remember, he was the Joint Strike Fighter program manager. And so he wanted a fly-off of multiple lunar systems from different companies. It was a cool idea, but that was just economic fiction. That was never going to happen. And so I knew that human spaceflight, the way I had always wanted to pursue it, was sort of asymptotically approaching non-reality. And so that's why I left Boeing after 17 years and went to JPL. Because even though JPL doesn't do human spaceflight, as you well know, 5,000 of the smartest people on the planet who don't necessarily know how to match their socks in the morning, but they know everything about anything related to flying complicated things in space, on a beautiful campus in Southern California doing noble work, so what's not to like? So
I have a funny story before you go on. So I had to, and like you, I say this with deep love and admiration for the place. I had to go to the JPL doctor on site, the one MD on site, because I asked for a extra legroom on a trip and I had to get a doctor's note saying that I'm tall for the travel approval. And so I said, so I'm in this doctor's office and I said, so out of curiosity, like, what do you deal with every day? It can't just be tall guys looking for a letter. He said, oh, it's mostly people who step off the curb and forget to put their foot in front of themselves. And, on the theme of incredibly brilliant people, and it seems a person cannot be that brilliant without, and again, I say this with love, without losing something in the process, it seems sometimes.
I have a vague theory that I call the zero-sumness of human capacity. So, but for the kind of work that JPL does, that's what it needs. And it's a great collection of fabulous people. And so I went there knowing that was kind of the end of my professional intersection with human spaceflight. But I'd been working a lot of hours at Boeing. And I think I'm the only person in Boeing history that quit the day I got promoted to executive. Because it's like, why would I, give myself a heart attack working on something that's not really what I wanted to do. And then at JPL, I discovered the world of space science, really. And science had been one of my other deep loves from when I was a kid. And as you know, we retooled the JPL Innovation Foundry. And then in the second half of my 14 years there, I was the program manager for planetary mission formulation, which was kind of remarkable. I felt for a lot of it, at the beginning, I guess I felt some imposter syndrome. I used to tell people I'm the only person at JPL that majored in art history, but we got a lot done. And I met some incredible members of the science community, the PIs that we supported and their teams. And I got to really love the work. And that was great. I mean, I was fine at JPL. I'd say a bit wistfully, ultimately, it was a good thing that I left because the house that I had lived in for 14 years is now just ashes from the Eaton fire. So we were not the owners anymore, but we would have been homeless if I were still at JPL. In any case, while I was there, really, the landscape changed again. And I used to, when I first started out, back before Gordy hired me, he explained to me that in civil space, you can work for the government where you have all the control and you don't do the work, or you can work for a contractor where you do the work, but you have no control, or you can work in academia where you can do whatever you want, but you have no resources. And so at the time I chose the contracting world, in Boeing, because I wanted to be where this stuff is built. But that triangle, it seemed to me by the mid-teens had become a tetrahedron. And you and I may have talked through this before while we were at the lab. I don't remember, but the fourth pole of the tetrahedron is what I call independent space. So these are teams, large, capable teams of experts who are funded differently from the way prime contractors are funded and who are working to their own roadmap. So that's different from a Lockheed Martin or a Northrop Grumman or a Boeing or, And
well, I think what you're referring to is we talked once about, I was beginning to wonder why, it was actually after the shutdown in 2013, I was beginning to wonder why we were fighting for a sliver of the federal budget when there was so much other capital out there. Yeah. And that observation is still interesting to me. It's valid.
It's still valid.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I was watching what SpaceX was doing. And mind you, this is 2018. So SpaceX wasn't really even a glimmer of what it is today. Maybe it was a glimmer, but it wasn't what it is today. Sure. And then there was this mystery company called Blue Origin. And the only thing anybody knew is that Bezos was putting money in every year. And I thought, well, if I have a chance to try this fourth pole and maybe influence its direction a little bit, I kind of couldn't forgive myself if I didn't try.
Sure.
And I accidentally learned that Blue was looking for a leader for its fourth business unit, which, they have engines, New Shepard, New Glenn, and then the fourth one was everything else. And they were looking for a leader for it. So that was a wrenching decision to leave JPL, but I did. And I went to Blue and was there for a little under 4.5 years. So I became the senior vice president for space systems development at Blue. And we created, depending on how you count, dozens of new programs in space systems. The ones that people are aware of are things like Orbital Reef, the commercial space station program. Now it's out in public is Blue Ring, which was our orbit transfer vehicle, a very highly capable robotic system.
The lunar lander,
the Blue Moon landers, the Mark 1 and the Mark 2, the Blue Alchemist ISRU technology for making solar cells out of lunar regolith, a bunch of other associated systems for the integrated architecture, the system of systems, some programs that we tried that were approved for a year and then got unapproved and went away. And, it's a very churny kind of environment.
Well, I'll say this, that I worked for Amazon Web Services for 3 years, and I did my best to dig up anything I could about Blue Origin from inside Amazon. I found nothing.
No, there wouldn't be anything.
I did eventually track down the Kuiper people in Seattle, and I was out there for a training, and I showed up at their door in their hidden, it was in a WeWork. It was that hidden. I showed up at the door. I'm like, hey, I work for AWS. I found you guys. And they were there. It won't surprise you knowing how I behaved at JPL. But so that was fun. But I couldn't find anything about Blue Origin. And I eventually gave up because I knew I wasn't at a national lab anymore and I was going to get myself in trouble. But I remained very curious about what they were doing. And I saw the lander at one of the DC, it wasn't AGU, but it was one of the,
it was probably IAC the year it was in Washington.
It was so all that stuff is still in the works, and we may in a month have Artemis 2, and so it's
when I went, which was July of 2019, 50 years after Apollo 11. I literally, we flew to Seattle 50 years to the day after the Apollo 11 landing. Anyway, when I started there, it was a 50-person, $35 million department. During the pandemic, we grew it to a $1 billion business with 1,100 people. And that was pretty exhausting, getting all those programs started. And many of them are still happening really deep in development. And as I said, some of them are becoming more visible now. So the Mark 1 should take its first flight later this year. Blue Ring is now a real program with real customers and multiple flight units in final assembly and test. The Mark 2 is the one that is on contract to NASA for landing the Artemis 5 crew. So a bunch of this stuff is now happening. And my time at Blue actually enabled me to retire with the knowledge that I had sort of gotten as close as feasible to the thing I had envisioned when I was 10 years old. Wasn't the
Yeah.
same, and it wasn't as much, and it wasn't as fast, but there was no other place on earth,
Sure.
where that kind of work was being done. So I was very fortunate to be able to kind of go through this crooked path,
Sure. Well, you kind of
to
rode
get
the
where we
waves
got.
up and down, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah,
I remember what I had blanked on when I was talking about AWS, which was you had mentioned programs at Blue Origin being up and canceled in a year. One of the lessons I learned about business from Amazon was the supposedly Jeff Bezos has just zero sentimentality about business units and programs. So basically absolutely no spending good money after bad. One of the what I saw from the inside and what I learned from Amazon is that the way they grew so quickly was just ruthless triage of everything they were doing and zero patience and sentimentality when something wasn't performing the way they wanted. And that is how I make sense of selling books to selling everything in 15 years. And I wondered, I remain curious how Blue Origin works internally. I'm sure I'll never find out, at least not without working there. But
no, the culture is the same as you described.
Okay.
I'd say when you're running a business, the challenge is that you have, in my case, I had 1,100 people who were depending on their jobs.
Sure.
They had mortgage payments and car payments and kids, and some of them had moved across the country during a pandemic, and stuff like that. So in my philosophy, there is I felt obligation to them as a team and as a collection of humans, which was probably not fully aligned with the philosophy you just described. But that's the job of a leader, is to moderate between those conditions, right? So, and it's hard. Meanwhile, like I say about aerospace things, we're trying to get near perfect performance out of imperfect systems designed and built by imperfect people living in imperfect organizations. So, it is
in a perpetually
it's a
fatal
hard
environment.
thing.
Yeah.
Well, there's that.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'd say about running a space futures business, like, developing first time systems for first of uses, is there's daylight between confidence and knowledge. And so when you put a business case together to invest in the development of a new system, the assumptions that go into the business case are debatable. And so a lot of the energy at the senior levels at the company, I assume it's the same at Amazon, but it certainly is at Blue, is arguing over whether this assumption or that assumption is the way it's actually going to turn out. And nobody knows.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's Jeff's company. So it's Jeff's decision whether he's going to invest, $500 million in a new program or not.
Right.
It's a tough environment to get a positive decision, in 1 month, and then you build a team and get things going and all that. And then 9 months later, it comes an equally quick decision to terminate it.
Yeah.
So, and that happened multiple times on multiple program attempts. So it's a very stressful environment. What I said to a lot of folks is I went to Blue because I wanted to see, what is this space billionaire thing like? Now I know. So, well, it has its rightful place in the set of, it's a valid pole of this tetrahedron.
Sure. Well, it seems
just like academia is, or,
Well, it seems it fits in the historical arc of the wealthy patrons of the art world in the past and other people who funded Galileo and Da Vinci. Or at least that's the model if you're going to project that backwards. And it's not totally new.
Yeah, but I agree, but I think that's not totally apt either.
Okay.
And that's because there was, if we just take Galileo as an example, there was never an expectation that anything practical was going to come from Galileo's research. Or painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is not there's no business case that justifies that. There's no, why did the Sistine Chapel need that ceiling, right? So you can write books about that. In our case, I really do believe that the development of human industry the human development of industry, because most of it's going to be robotic, in space has a fundamental role to play in the future of civilization. So I think it is practical, even though to most people it seems like it's disconnected.
Sure.
I mean, we're on the verge of being able to access unlimited material and energetic resources in the solar system.
Yeah.
Because we live in a closed system, this thin skin on this singular planet in the universe, having access to material resources and energy resources that don't come from within that thin skin is essential if there's going to be a long-term future for the species and for civilization. You know, humans have only been in existence for 200,000 years. You know, people like to joke and say the reason the dinosaurs went extinct is because they didn't have a space program. But the dinosaurs lasted for tens of millions of years.
They did okay.
We should be so lucky as to end up as successful as the dinosaurs were.
Yeah.
And yet we're not on a sustainable trajectory toward that, right? Because we're fouling our own nest.
Yeah.
And, you know, we could go into the litany of things that we're doing that are wrong-minded for long-term sustainability.
Yes.
So space isn't really an antidote to terrible behavior. And in some cases, space may even amplify or exacerbate terrible behavior, but it's also a kind of a safety valve.
Yeah.
It can be a safety valve to give us time to learn how to grow up. And,
like that. Yeah.
You know, that's the Star Trek model, is that on the other side of these troubles that we're in the Star Trek universe, there's a World War III, you know, between where we are and where they, but on the other side of these troubles is a state of maturity of the human species that is different from what we live in today.
Yeah.
And
it's a wisdom.
And so I never gave up on trying to, you know, do my little tiny part to try to make that happen. And I think reaching out into space does that.
I agree. And I was just explaining to someone earlier, part of my philosophy is that that permanently fatal environment, it brings out the best of humanity and our need to communicate and cooperate and design solutions and build tools. And that's one of the things that I recognized at a very young age and has always motivated me, is that survival environment brings out our best, or at least it can.
It can. And so I think, you know, those of us in the space business all agree with that. I'd say that's somewhat ineffable, though, which makes it hard to motivate people, you know, with that. The way I normally think about space futures now, after having spent a few careers in it, is that there are different futures. I call it the 4 futures. There are different futures we can aim at. And the one that people sort of casually think is the one I call explore, which is, you know, reaching out and finding out what's there and learning about it and enriching our knowledge of the universe and how it works and so forth. But that's not the only one. What people conflate explore with is expand, which is about settling space, establishing self-sustaining colonies or settlements, places where civilization can grow, and you have all the things that architects really need to do, you know, from hospitals to mortuaries and, you know, all that. Schools and cities, all those things. That's really hard in space because it is permanently lethal everywhere.
Yeah.
But the fundamental problem, the challenge of space futures is that explore is what we can afford to do some of. Expand is what we can't afford to do any of, and we don't have the technology for it, and we don't know how to bridge from one to the other. I think the bridge is the other 2 futures, one of which is experience, which means getting people to pay instead of paying people to go. Yeah. Right. So you reach into a source of capital, which is people's pocketbooks instead of the government coffers.
Right.
And the 4th one is exploit, which is directly adding value into the terrestrial economy from resources that are sourced in space, whether they be material like helium-3 on the moon or energy like free photons from the sun. But those 2, I think, are the only possible bridge. I don't know if they can work either, but they're the only possible bridge from exploring to expanding, because they access sources of capital that are outside the top line budget constraint of
Right.
NASA or DOD or DOE or all of them put together.
Well, and the historical analog being the commercial operations across the oceans in the Renaissance and the last 500 years that connected the whole world together with all of its attendant horrors, but still.
Well, yeah, I mean, bad stuff comes too, but like you look at the commercial aviation, right? It needed the mail service contract to get started in the U.S., but it would never be what it is today if it weren't for business people and tourists flying, around the world. So
well, and now it's this weird situation where they barely make any money flying, and they make all their money on points and programs like that. So it's become a weird inversion almost, where the incredible advanced technology breaks even.
It's a good lesson though, because what it shows is that you can sort of in retrospect now, you can lay out a reasonable business trajectory that enabled thousands of jets to be built and sold every year and operated, millions of passenger miles and all that. But nobody predicted that the actual business was going to be credit cards, which is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. The airlines don't really make money flying people. They make money on credit cards that they have deals with.
Right.
So I think most people are unaware of the economics of the air travel industry. But in any case, we wouldn't have any of the associated industries and infrastructure, airports and all the concessions and the transportation nodes and cargo shipment and all these. We wouldn't have any of that if it weren't for paying passengers being the foundation that industry was built on. So I think that industries that don't yet exist, like providing clean electrical power to Earth from space, will end up being as transformational in the history of civilization as air travel was in the 20th century.
Yeah.
But you don't get that stuff if you don't even explore in the first place.
Right.
We got to learn how to extract helium-3 on the moon and get it back to Earth without it all boiling away. And, there's so much practical stuff that we have to learn before any of these things become more than just ideas, that we have a lot to learn, and we probably don't have a lot of time to learn it in.
There's really, we've passed several subjects where it will be very satisfying to close our episode on. And I think that this is a really good one, which is, I'm often struck by the fact that if I lived for 1,000 years, I'd still have more questions than answers.
Hopefully.
So I really like the way you describe the urgency of learning about our solar system universe, our place in it, how we can better use it, work with it, improve human life. Before we close, what's next for you? What does the next 5 years look like in your world?
Well, as I said, I'm focusing on my writing. And so what I'm working on now is a one or more book-length treatments of the four futures.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I've published almost 100 papers in my career, book chapters and things. But what I realize, and you probably remember this from the stuff we worked on together, I spent 35 years practicing how to write in a very clear but dense way, because that's what you have to do for technical proposals. Right. And you probably remember I used to describe editing as like a game. How many words can you remove just by rearranging and, bumping the lines and, to get more content. And for me, that's fun. But what I realize is that kind of writing, although it's good for proposal evaluators, is not good for normal people. And so what I'm learning how to do now is take the ideas that I've put down in a paragraph where I know what it says, and sort of give it room to breathe, to expand, and to bring people along. So part of my goal is to make these, I think, important, but definitely complicated ideas and connections accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't see them or wouldn't know or care.
Sure.
And I'm inspired by that. And I hope that communicating these things can help inspire other people to make good decisions about what our space future programs are. So yeah, the first book is about the four futures. I'm also working on a couple of memoirs and some stuff related to space architecture because it's my
Cool.
thing, so I always need multiple things at once to work. So
I hear you. Yeah.
yeah. So that's, I've got multiple drafts in work but I'm spending a couple hours a day on writing, which is
Great.
fun. It's very fun.
Wonderful. Well, I think on that note, we're going to wrap up this very interesting episode. I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I look forward to reading about the four futures. If you ever need a draft review, let me know.
Oh, thanks.
And
I appreciate that.
And I wish you the best for a relaxing and as productive as you feel like retirement in Spain.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
All right. Take care. And thanks everybody for tuning into this episode of the Space Madness podcast.